Behind me is the Subaru Outback in mid-spec sport guise that gets water repellent seats and a pretty cool green color in this particular spec. Now in today's video we're going to be driving this model year 21 example. There is a model year 22 but the changes are very small and really extend to a different seat back pocket design. And in today's review we're really going to be questioning whether you should jump in the queue for a Subaru Outback now with that 2.5 litre naturally aspirated boxer, or whether you should wait till next year's car arrives with the option of a 2.4 litre turbo. Now we've got a few reviews of the Subaru Outback here on the Chasing Cars YouTube channel already, including several long-term updates. And the issue we keep coming back to is the 2.5 litre naturally aspirated boxer 4-cylinder engine. It's not a bad engine, it just feels like this Outback could do with more power than the 138 kilowatts and 245 newton meters on tap that you get from this engine connected to a CVT gearbox. But I guess we'll talk a little bit more about it right now as we take it out on the road and whether or not this might be enough for you as a driver. First up, let's talk about how that engine works in practice out here on the road, because although its outputs of 138 kilowatts and 245 newton meters are actually pretty decent for a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder unit, in the real world this car's 1.629 tons does require a little bit more grunt than this, I reckon, for really quick progress. That's not to say that it is particularly unpleasant. Yes, when you get on the gas it does flare the revs, as I'll do now, the CVT, and it's not so much when you're full throttle that's annoying, because you kind of expect that from a car when you're giving it everything, but it's more when you're just kind of cruising along trying to keep up with traffic at about, get from the stoplights to 60, 70 k's an hour in a fairly timely fashion. It does make a little bit of noise, but once you're up there, the CVT actually allows you to sort of skip along without too much hassle. So I guess, yeah, for me personally, I feel like this car would be totally great with more power. It would just be better. That 194 kilowatt, 375 newton meter, 2.4 litre turbo 4-cylinder that's coming to this car sometime next year according to Subaru and is currently on sale in the US would just be a slightly more well-suited engine to this car. But again, if you just need a car to be a car and you don't really care about outright pace, then this thing's fine. The rest of the Outback package is still really quite good. The suspension compliance is, I think, slightly better than the Subaru Forester. It feels a little bit less fidgety, but it still has that slightly cheaply damped Subaru feel where you do notice lower speed sort of fidget in a road surface that looks otherwise smooth, perhaps a little bit more than other cars. I also think the ride frequency is a little bit off. So it's quite softly damped in the rear end, but firmly sprung. And what that means is when you're coming off speed humps in urban environments, sometimes you'll get sort of 1.5 cycles of the rear suspension as you're coming off those speed humps. But what that does mean is out here on the open road, this car's quite dynamic for the sort of vehicle it is. Definitely feels a little bit better than its large SUV compatriots, for example, the Kia Sorento, which is probably the best driving of the traditional large SUVs. I still think the Forester just feels that little bit lighter on its feet. It's got really nice crisp steering, and of course it's got a bona fide full-time four-wheel drive system, which means that it always feels sure-footed. So even when that slightly oversprung rear end does sort of step out the back of this car, you know you're safe because you've got a really well-tuned ESC system, and the all-wheel drive system there is just going to suck you out of any trouble. It also means you can take it into the dirt without much hassle. You do have an X mode system in this car as well, accessible through here in the center screen, where you've got dirt, snow settings and that sort of thing. That's pretty cool. I don't know how much of a difference it's really going to make when a car doesn't have any locking differentials, but it's nice to know that if you do get a little bit stuck, there are a couple of programs that might be able to help you out. Speaking of helping you out, let's get to the driving assistance aids, which this Subaru is pretty well equipped with its eyesight system. The latest eyesight camera-based technology is getting better. I still had an instance in Sydney's rain where the camera system cut out and said adaptive cruise control lane keep assist not available in a little bit of heavy rain, which is kind of annoying, especially considering that this car is sort of from Japan and it's quite heavily focused on the North American market, both places that do get quite wet. So hopefully that's solved in the facelift. There's some sort of thing to help out that camera stay clean for a little bit longer, but still, the adaptive cruise control and the lane keep assist system works pretty decently. Got blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert and front and rear AEB. All of that helps this car get a 5-star ANCAP rating here in Australia and be a genuinely safe vehicle for the whole family. Now the Sport is effectively the mid-spec grade of Outback for the MY21 and MY22 year models. There was a premium grade, but at $45,990, this sits below the Touring, which continues in the range, and above the all-wheel drive, which is the base model car. It's told apart by a couple of things: the snazzy green stitching, and of course this water-repellent upholstery that kind of feeds into the fact that this Subaru Outback is made for outdoorsy kinds of people. And it's always been its shtick, not quite an SUV, although it is sold technically as an SUV here in Australia. This lifted wagon is actually just really nice to sit in. No, it doesn't feel super plush or comfortable, but a lot of the materials are really nice and soft to touch, especially this armrest here, which is in a contrasting sort of grey, and the technology in the Outback is really easy to interact with. You've got this portrait orientation touchscreen here, which initially might seem a little bit weird and awkward to get used to, but actually because we're so used to working with phone screens now, it makes so much sense, and it does a great job of mirroring Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Yes, you have to do that using a cable, and your phone sort of sits in this kind of slightly awkward little cubby here that's hard to get into, but ultimately when it's hooked up, it's reliable, simple, and it just works. And that theme kind of carries right throughout this Outback, just like it did in that Forester I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. Things just work. Though I will say there are a couple of issues with everything being in the touchscreen. For example, accessing the lane keep assist button to turn that off, which can be quite persistent and annoying out on the road. You've got to do that through the touchscreen and jump through a couple of hoops. You've also got HVAC controls buried in the touchscreen. They are persistent at the bottom, but it is still one extra click to adjust the temperature. I will add that this car has very cold air conditioning as well. So normally I'm a 21 or a 20 degree guy, but I've had to pop it up for 22 degrees in winter here in Sydney because it's just a little bit too cold. But you know, that's actually really good in summer. Ahead of me, I've got analog dials, which look fairly attractive, a 4.2-inch TFT screen there as well. And although the exterior of this Outback is set to change a little bit when the facelift comes along here in Australia in 2022, the interior basically remains the same with some minor tweaks. So the Outback you see here is what you're going to get inside. And also I happen to think that this current example of Outback actually looks a little bit more handsome than the update that's due to come in not too long. Of course, to round out the Outback, we've got to talk about its practicalities. You've got this nice shelf here in front of the passenger where they could put their phone, their keys, or what have you. You've also got a nice deep center bin here, two very deep cup holders, plenty of space for a camping bottle, and a really generous door bin for up to a 1 litre bottle. And the seats themselves are heated and electrically adjustable, and all that stuff is just really nice and makes this Outback Sport feel like a very complete package for its $45,990 plus on-road costs price. There's so much room in the back of this Outback. Even behind my driving position at 6'2", I've got plenty of legroom, heaps of tow room, and a really generous amount of headroom. Now, that's all great, but the one place where this Outback falls down against its other large SUV counterparts, of course, is that you can't get this vehicle with 7 seats. There's no longer an option to get those jump seats in the back like you used to see on old Subaru Liberties and Outbacks. That's probably great for safety, but it does mean this car is a little more compromised than some of its rivals. That said, the back seat here is great. The seat bench itself is super comfortable, very squishy. I'm not sure how supportive it would be on a longer journey, but it is extremely comfortable for shorter ones. You've also got a truly usable middle seat, and compared to the Subaru Forester in a spec upgrade, so the 2.5 IS, you actually get a little bit more in the back of this Outback because you get 2-stage heated seats for both outboard passengers. And on a cold morning like this one, that would be absolutely lovely to get the kids back in here and warm them up on the way to school. While I'm talking about kids, we've also got to address the baby seats, because the Outback is not really that much harder to fit baby seats in than the Subaru Forester. The doors open really wide, and the ISOFIX port access points are really easy to use. You've got this really nice flap that just pops out of the way, nothing to lose, nothing to go wrong, and it just works. Simple. You do also have a pretty decent view out, but not quite as good as the Forester, but still soft touch right up on top of the door cards. This Sport also gets tinted rear windows to keep the sun off the face of anyone back here. I may be alone in my opinion, so I'd love to hear yours down below, but I don't actually reckon the Subaru Outback needs a facelift right now. I think it's a handsome looking car. Yes, it's a slightly boring shape, but it's a better looking vehicle than an SUV in my opinion, and also in Tom's opinion. You'll know that if you've watched one of his videos on an Outback before. This Sport as well gets a couple of nice details, these blacked out badges, and I really like the taillight design. It's kind of grown on me of the new Outback. The Sport also gets these contrasting green highlights on the roof rails. The Sport, even though it's not the top model, does get an electric tailgate. That's really nice. You also get this honeycomb mat in the back here to protect the carpet if you're putting muddy things in there like mountain bikes, hiking shoes, or anything like that. And the cargo space on offer is really generous. 522 litres in total. And you've got these tabs back here so you can pull them down and really easily fold the second row of seats. And you can lie down in the back of this thing really comfortably, fit a mountain bike in there or several mountain bikes super easily. And it all fits into that sort of active lifestyle that the Subaru brand promises you, and it's been really popular here in Australia and in North America as well. Finally, we have niceties like these cute little pop-out curry hooks and the fact that you get a full-size spare tyre under the boot floor. It's a great peace of mind for a big country like Australia. The Outback's ADR combined fuel consumption figure is 7.3 litres per 100 kilometres. We recorded 8.7 litres per 100 Ks, but around town in urban environments, you're going to see this car's fuel consumption blow out to 12 to 13 litres per 100 Ks, even though it's got a pretty decent start-stop system. As for servicing, that's due every 12 months or 12,500 kilometres at a cost of $2,488 over 5 years. For insurance, the median budget direct customer paid $879 to comprehensively insure their new Subaru Outback in the last 12 months. Your premium may vary based on things that insurers take into account, such as your driving history, where you live, and whether or not you garage the vehicle. The Subaru Outback continues to be practical, hugely spacious, fairly comfortable, and with the security of all-wheel drive, it means that you're never going to be stranded really in the Subaru Outback. But the question of today's review is whether or not you should jump on the bandwagon right now, get your hands on a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated version of this car, or wait a little bit longer for the turbo. Well, for a start, this is one of the few cars not hampered by seriously long wait times in Australia. Depending on spec, it's going to be between 3 to 6 months at the time of filming this video. So if you want a car fairly quickly, you're going to be able to beat the queue of a lot of other manufacturers here. But personally, for me, I do wish this car just had that little bit more grunt that the Turbo 2.4 will surely bring next year with its 194 kilowatts of power. But that said, the 2.5 is actually pretty adequate. It still gets the Subaru up to speed relatively quickly in a timely manner. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on whether you're going to be rushing out to buy an Outback right now or waiting for the facelift. And while you're there leaving your comments, why not hit subscribe if you haven't done so already? And as always, thank you very much for watching Chasing Cars.